So let's talk about it. Let's talk about Max Verstappen and his two sensational drives in Sao Paulo over the last 2 years. Of course, he came from 17th on the grid to win the 2024 event, and this year in 2025, he started from the pit lane, suffered a puncture, and still managed to get third place, almost second by the flag, just being less than a second behind Kimi Antonelli, who had a fantastic weekend of his own as well in Brazil. Now, of course, these two drives are arguably two of the best performances over the last few years in Formula One of any driver on the grid. It was absolutely incredible to witness on both occasions, and indeed, I waxed lyrical about Max Verstappen 12 months ago after his performance in Brazil. But which is better? Which is the better one of the two? Well, I'm going to dive into the details and give my opinion, but like I said in the intro, I mean, this is like a 10 out of 10 drive on both occasions. I mean, it was absolutely incredible to witness. Nobody expected it. Let's look at 2024 first, just in case you're new to Formula One, just in case your memory's not that good from 12 months ago, because I rewatched the highlights of that race, and I must admit, looking back at it, it was absolutely unbelievable. I thought at the time it was one of the best drives we've ever seen in Formula One, full stop. You know, a lot of people saying rightly that Max Verstappen is the GOAT after that. Max Verstappen is definitely one of the GOATs in Formula One. He's without a doubt in the conversation, and drives like that in Sao Paulo in 2024 is exactly why. See, it wasn't just the fact that he went from pretty much the back of the grid all the way to take victory. There were a lot of things going on that weekend. For a start, the Grand Prix was run in really difficult wet conditions. It was intermediates throughout the entire race, and indeed some people actually switched to the wet tyre, which ended up being the wrong move, but that just tells you how tricky it was at times. But on top of that, probably the most difficult thing about this Grand Prix was the actual surface of the track itself. And I've spoke about this year going into the Brazilian Grand Prix. But 12 months ago, the track was completely resurfaced, and it was done so at the 11th hour, not dissimilar to what we saw before the Turkish Grand Prix in 2020. That year's Formula One season was very chaotic, with very good reasons, as we know, so you can kind of let Turkey off to an extent when it comes to that. But why Brazil decided to resurface the track right before the Grand Prix, I do not know. But the end result is that the track was extremely low grip and very bumpy as well. I mean, you look at some of the off-board shots of Max Verstappen going down the inside of drivers into turn one, and you'll be left in no doubt at how bumpy the surface is. It's never a particularly smooth surface in Brazil because of the undulating nature, the incline and decline nature of a lot of the circuit is naturally going to be a bit more bumpy on the suspension because of that, but it looks downright dangerous, and I think that's why a lot of people were being overtaken so easily by Max. That's not to diminish what Max did by any stretch of the imagination. The fact that he was able to have the confidence to go and fly down the inside when nobody else was really doing that shows the complete car control and the skill level of that driver to be able to do something like that. That really does single him out as being a cut above the rest. The fact that nobody else was able to do that, and he was the one guy doing it consistently and effectively as well. Now, what's kind of a mark against Verstappen when it comes to this race, if there is such a thing as a mark against somebody who did a 10 out of 10 drive, is the fact that he did get a little bit lucky when it came to the red flag. See, about halfway through the race, Max Verstappen had got all the way to about 5th or 6th, but at that time the rain was really starting to pour even heavier. Some guys at the front of the field, such as George Russell and Lando Norris, decided to pit for fresh intermediates, and indeed some people even went on the full extreme wets as well. Verstappen and Ocon, though, crucially decided not to do that. And even though they were on the same tyres as everybody else, their tyres were a lot more worn down. The grooves in them had started to wear away, particularly probably for the rear tyres more than anything. That meant that getting on the throttle was very difficult and a lot easier for the guys who got fresh into. And then Franco Colapinto, of course, crashed his Williams, and we got a red flag as a result of that. We were already under safety car conditions because of the wet weather, but that threw a red flag and allowed everybody to change their tyres. Of course, Max Verstappen being one of them, and at that point he was effectively on the same pit strategy as everybody else, and he was up in P2, only Esteban Ocon ahead of him, and he made light work of Esteban Ocon as well, passed him pretty easily, but fair play to the Alpines, they managed to get a double podium from that one. Verstappen won by a considerable margin at the end, but I bet if he pushed throughout the entire race, he could have won by an even bigger margin than that. Such was his dominance, there was no real threat from behind as soon as he got past the Alpines. This year in 2025, it was a little less straightforward if there is such a thing. He started from the very back of the grid. In fact, not even on the grid itself. He started from the pit lane because he opted to change all of his engine components. He already qualified in P16 after a poor showing during qualifying. But the Red Bull basically had no pace over one lap. However, during the Grand Prix, it was a bit different. They used that opportunity of going outside of parc fermé conditions to reconfigure the car, and it very much worked. Although it didn't get off to the best start because, of course, he got that puncture early on, had to pit, went to the back of the grid. But his pace from that point on was absolutely mesmeric, not unlike Michael Schumacher, who did something similar almost 20 years ago when he was going for a world championship. Schumacher had to win that Grand Prix, but he got an early puncture. However, despite that, he almost made it to the podium by the finish, despite being almost a lap down after that puncture. Verstappen did something similar as well. Clearly, there wasn't much damage on the car. He had absolutely electric pace. He sighed through the field. In fact, he even led at one point as well. And when the pit stop shook out, he was very much the faster car behind Kimi Antonelli, getting all the way to the podium. So, which drive was better? Well, given the fact that Max did it in the wet, given the fact that there was a very uneven and bumpy surface and he was the only guy able to make it work down the inside going to turn 1 during that Grand Prix, I have to give it to 2024. Yes, of course, he was lucky with the safety car and the red flag, but I firmly believe, and I said this at the time, I firmly believe that Max would have won that Grand Prix anyway. He did everything right. He stayed out and gambled when other people pit and took the safe option. He showed why he's a 4-time world champion and why he's considered one of the GOATs. That's not to diminish his 2025 drive, of course. Coming back from the back of the grid twice with that puncture is extremely impressive. Although, of course, he did have a completely fresh engine component, which would have helped him. And also some guys further up the field did have bad races. Of course, Charles Leclerc, he started in 3rd. He was taken out by the incident involving Kimi Antonelli and Oscar Piastri. Piastri had a 10-second penalty as well because of that. Would he have been on Max Verstappen? Would he have been ahead of Max Verstappen without that penalty? Quite possibly he would have been. But at the end of the day, Max capitalised on everything that was available to him, and despite the fact that he's dropped down in the championship as a result of that, he can very much head into 2026 on a high, given how impressive he was in Brazil. He's so good around Sao Paulo. He even showed that all the way back in 2016. Getting a podium, could have been a P2, did one of the best recoveries I've ever seen in a Formula 1 car as well. So yeah, both 10 out of 10 drives. But if I had a gun to my head and I had to choose one, I would go for 2024. But still, arguably the performances of whatever season they were, the best performances in 2024 and 2025. Who expected Max to be on the podium? Honestly, especially after getting that puncture early on during the Sao Paulo Grand Prix this year. I know I didn't. I thought a top 5 would have been a brilliant result, and it would have been. But a podium, nearly P2, absolutely sensational. Chef's kiss to that. But yeah, what gets your vote, guys? 24 or 25? Let me know in the comments below. Like, share, comment, and subscribe if you want to see more F1 opinions just like this. Have a fantastic day wherever you are in the world today, and we'll see you very soon.